Welcome to Tuesday. It's a good day. They all are. I say that all the time. But I hope it's a great one for you. Come in for a moment. Let's share a thought or two together. We're talking about character. As yesterday we talked about the content of our character and how we should measure by the content of a person's character. One of the qualities of character is that of overcoming stubborn selfishness. I want you to think about that for a moment because we do tend to get a bit stubborn about some things. We become that way from time to time as we like to think what we think and what we think is right. Did I say that right? I think I did. In all seriousness, we tend to get into our line of thinking, and once we get there, it's hard to go backward again. And sometimes we reach points in life where we ought to turn around, but it's a difficult thing to do, and it's hard to go back. I want to tell you about a fellow I knew. I guess when we were sophomores in high school, we began high school that year together, and along the way, he disappeared. His name was Larry. And then in the next year, he disappeared. We didn't know where he went, didn't know what happened to him. I really didn't know much about him. I liked him. He was a nice guy and friendly, all that. But the next year as the school year got underway, somewhere along the line in the beginning of the school year, he showed up. He even joined the track team. Then at that time of year, it was the cross country team. And we became even better friends, did a lot of things together. Several of us were good friends and did a lot of things together. And somewhere along the line, I asked him something. I said, "Where have you been? Larry, where have you been?" And he said, "Just out." My friend's name was Larry L. Lawrence. I asked him one day what the L stood for, and he said, "Lawrence." I said, "Your name is Larry Lawrence Lawrence?" He said, "Not exactly." And then it dawned on me. Larry is often short for Lawrence. His parents named him Lawrence, Lawrence, Lawrence. I guess they had a good sense of humor. Anyway, as he progressed in life, grew up, got to his teenage years, the family home became a pretty rough place to be, and he and his father got at great odds with one another. And during that sophomore year in high school, it reached a fevered pitch, and he just left home. And I said, "Well, where did you go?" Back to the story. "Where did you go?" He said, "Just out." I said, "What do you mean you went out?" He said, "I went out. I hopped a train." To that point in my life, I had only known and seen a few of those so-called bums or hobos who hopped trains and rode along and walked the railroad tracks. There were still some in my youthful days. And he had done that very thing. I said, "Well, where'd you go?" He said, "Lots of places. Went from place to place, traveled from here to there." And I said, "How'd you live?" He said, "Just got by." Said, "Sometimes I'd beg, sometimes I'd work a little, sometimes I'd find something to do, sometimes someone would help me out." And I said, "You just kind of lived out on your own?" I said, "You bet. Sometimes I had a place to sleep and sometimes I didn't." It's kind of interesting. And I said, "But you're back." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I got out there and after a while I got tired of being cold, hot, hungry, dirty." He said, "I got tired of it all. Didn't have anybody I could trust, nobody I could turn to. And finally," he said, "I just decided I'd come home." I said, "Did you and your dad work it out?" He said, Sort of. We're getting along. In fact, he's being pretty good to me, he said. I don't remember all the details of our discussion, but I know he had kind of a tough time. And if I remember right, it seemed like we did make it through our senior year together. I don't really remember whether he graduated with us or not, but he was a nice guy. But he felt like he had learned something and something had been accomplished by his wanderings. And the main thing he learned was it was good to go back home. He told me it was one of the hardest things he ever did, but yet one of the most needed things he ever did. Sounds kind of like a familiar story, doesn't it? And I'm not making it up. But Lawrence reminded me a lot of that story in Luke chapter 15. There was that young man we call the prodigal who was out seemingly wasting the inheritance that his father had given him. And when he ran out and had nowhere else to go and no one was going to take care of him and no one was going to feed him and he was in a desperate situation, he remembered home. He remembered his father and how good his father was to even the least in his household. Verse 18 of Luke 15 says, the young man said, I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your servants. Now, I've got to tell you, I think that young man, in the story Jesus told, learned something about character. Really? I think Larry probably did too. I don't know what happened to Larry after graduation, but I know that he made it through coming home and picking up his life again. Most of us don't take that kind of trip, don't wander that far from home. But aren't there opportunities for us to grab hold of our character, to make a change, and revisit where we've been? And by that I mean go back and rebuild. Exactly what the young man did. And like Larry and the young man in Jesus' story, there's generally found those who are willing to help, willing to restore, willing to be a part of that life. What it takes is character that overcomes our selfish or stubborn attitudes. It takes a willingness to restart, to rebuild, and develop the best of relationships. If we're willing to do that, and I believe that's called character. The other things, the missteps, the wanderings, they tend to diminish. Hopefully we've learned some good lessons. And isn't it good to restore the best of things in terms of relationships, people, and life? Hey, I like that, don't you? I think Larry learned. I think the so-called prodigal learned. Maybe you and I can learn something from it too. Friends, I hope you're having a great day. I hope it's a day of character for you. And as you think about your life, let's move forward. Let's move forward with that character in the best way we can. Hey, I'm glad you're with me today. We'll share some more things further down the road. It's a great time to be together, a great time to think about one another, a great time to be alive. Hey, thanks for being with me today.